Welcome, everybody, to an exceptional episode of the CISO Sandbox webinar here. We have had the most impressive amount of technical difficulties that we have had yet in the sandbox. And that is one way to introduce our incredible all-star panel that we have today, the award-winning thought leaders and co-authors behind the CISO Executive Primer, which I recommend everybody to read. It is a companion piece to the CISO Desk Reference Guide, one of the most well-reviewed and well-respected titles on the subject here. We have Bill Bonney, Gary Hayslip, and Matt Stamper. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you. Welcome. Glad to be here.
Thank you.
It's great to have you here. So I'll try and talk as little as possible. This will be a Q&A, and I recommend the audience to ask questions throughout the actual talk itself. It's great to have these things be as interactive as possible. But what we'll be doing this is, by organizing it around chapters of the CISO Executive Primer, and those chapters will be on reporting structure for the modern CISO, third-party risk, and my personal favorite, the human element. And before we go into those, let's direct this question to, well, before we even go into that, if you all could please introduce yourselves, maybe by order of author appearance on the title, and tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, what you're up to, and where you're calling from.
Oh, sure, I'll start then. My name is Bill Bonney. My background is formerly in IT, and then I transitioned into information security back about 2003, 2004. I spent about a decade at Intuit and retired from the corporate life about 2014. And then shortly after that, met my two wonderful partners, Matt and Gary, and the three of us founded a company called CISO DRG, which actually publishes books in this genre by practitioners for practitioners. The original launch of that was the CISO Desk Reference Guide that you were kind enough to mention. I'm here in San Diego, California, where I'm happily ensconced next to the ocean and living the wonderful life.
Fantastic. I'm jealous. Love it out there.
Mm-hmm.
I guess the next one, yeah, I think that would be me. Good morning, it's Gary Hayslip. I'm currently the CISO for SoftBank Investment Advisors. I live in San Diego as well, but I work in the Bay Area, which is where I'm at right now. I have an apartment in Palo Alto, and I'm up here during the week. I have about 20 years of experience in both IT and cybersecurity. I'm in my fifth role as a CISO right now. I write and mentor and work with CISOs all over the world, and just love the space. Love the cybersecurity space, and I'm lucky to have Bill and Matt as friends and partners in this endeavor. We have a lot of fun time when we're writing and arguing and just discussing different topics. As you can see in our books, we have very different viewpoints on things, which I think works really well together.
And Matt Stamper, I'm Gary and Bill's bodyguard. And unfortunately, I'm a little bit remote right now. I'm up visiting my dad up in beautiful the Puget Sound area up in the Pacific Northwest. So really enjoying it up here. I am a CISO at EVOTEK. Before that, I was a research director and security analyst at Gartner, covering a number of topics around SOAR, incident response, security program design and development. And then prior to that, I was a CISO at a multinational, kind of international MSSP and data center company. So I had a lot of operational experience, both in the US as well as in Mexico and other venues. So really thrilled for the discussion today. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, well, it really is an honor to have you all here. So I would like to get into this as quickly as possible, because these things can go long enough with one guest, and having three experts here at the same time. I just love to hear the insights that are going to come out and the way that you guys could rip off of each other. So let's go ahead and go in order, and we'll start with the first chapter on the reporting structure of the modern CISO. And before we get into this, one really cool thing about the way these chapters are organized is they have these really clever quotes to kick each one off. So on chapter 1, the CISO, the quote here is, A great wind is blowing, and that gives you either imagination or a headache. Catherine the Great. So with that, with chapter 1, reporting, I believe this is Bill. This is your topic is up here.
Yeah, so we're going to start by reading a very short excerpt from that's taken directly out of chapter 1, and this is a section that's titled "The Technical IT Focused CISO Reporting to Traditional IT Leadership." When the CISO reports into a traditional IT structure, there's usually a more technical focus on cybersecurity activities. The CISO's primary function is to minimize the risks associated with IT services and to provide technical cyber-related expertise to the CISO's colleagues within IT. Cybersecurity is network-centric, and core activities in this role center on device and network security. It's a dangerous world, and the CISO and his or her staff are there to ensure that only good data packets enter or leave the organization. Some refer to this approach as the packet police. This is an overly simplified view of the CISO's function to make the distinction more explicit when compared to the empowered CISO role discussed below. There are substantial benefits from an IT-centric and technical approach to the CISO role. The cyber threats facing organizations today can be highly sophisticated attacks, and advanced persistent threats require in-depth technical knowledge to discover and mitigate. Specifically, the CISO's team needs to understand packet analysis, network design and topology, and technical indicators of compromise to triage and respond to anomalous behavior within the organization. These skills and competencies are at the center of cybersecurity. An IT-centric CISO becomes a critical member of the IT leadership team, validating security configurations and practices. Of concern with this reporting relationship, however, is the inherent conflict created by the reporting structure. If the CISO's core function is to ensure the IT security practices and configurations are managed correctly, communicating challenges with these practices upward in the organization, e.g. to the CISO's boss, can be problematic. The CISO is essentially asked to police his or her boss's work, evaluating the risk considerations created by the boss's selected technologies and their deployment. Such feedback can be career limiting. So this is the introduction that we provided about the kind of more technically focused aspect of the CISO's job. And in those special circumstances, which is really kind of more the traditional way that the CISO has been set up within the organization, which is to report into either the CIO or the CTO and play a direct supporting role. So as I mentioned in the introduction there, there are some advantages to this because you're in sort of a tech-focused family to begin with. You're not you're not kind of spending most of your time external to the technical functions. So you're kind of in a comfort zone, if you will. And the people that you're talking to also understand very much the language that you're speaking. So there's less of that constant translation and less of that constant kind of arguing over semantics. I mean, you're literally arguing over technology, you're arguing over deployment techniques, but that is a very comforting and kind of commonplace that all of us has kind of come up through. And as I said, there's quite a few advantages to it. The flip side, the disadvantage, of course, is that in today's environment, more and more CISOs are being asked to provide a kind of overall overarching kind of control mindset and looking at and kind of testing the functionality of various and sundry IT controls throughout the organization, and then oftentimes reporting those results either to the executive team or in some cases directly to the board. And that can create quite a bit of conflict if there is substantial disagreement within the IT organization over exactly how to allocate things like budget and whether or not some of these control concerns are overwritten for expediency. And that can kind of create friction. At the same time, a good working relationship between the CISO and his or her boss should helpfully mitigate most of those issues. And I know, Gary, you've got quite a bit of experience with that functionality working quite well. And I know you've got some thoughts around that as well.
Yeah, I mean, my thing is like when I read the the chapter at the beginning of it, it's funny how I've kind of gone 360. You know, it used to be where I used to really push to not be reporting to the CIO, because I mean, I've reported to the CIO, the CTO, the CFO, the COO, and the CEO. I mean, I've reported to so many different structures, but what I've found is in today's day and age in business today, especially, the more you move into cloud enablement, the more you move into, you know, this digital experience, you know, security has their own stack. We've got our own technologies, we've got our own stack, we have our own services. And when we go ahead and we do security and we manage risk, we're not just doing it for IT, we're doing it for the whole company. And like, you know, here at SoftBank, I've got 360 SaaS apps. Only about 60 of them belong to IT. You know, the rest of them belong to, you know, my 30 plus different departments, you know, and so I'm doing security across all of that. And so it, you know, whether you like it or not, you have to partner with IT, because their stack of core technologies and then your stack have to work together and are actually intertwined. You know, so you both have to work together regardless, and you have to have a good working relationship. But I think, you know, that as a CISO, you do more outside of IT now.
Mhm.
You know, that's more business impacting. That's more, you know, across, you know, the various business units, and it helps having the, you know, a good working relationship with IT, because they can help you understand data flows in between apps. They can help you understand a lot of the connections to third party because of a lot of the supply chain issues that we, you know, that we now are facing. But honestly, I look beyond IT now. You know, a lot of times when I'm working, and when I, you know, even though I report to the CIO now, and I, you know, in our one-on-ones, he knows who I'm talking to and what I'm working on, and I'll CC him on a lot of the stuff that I'm doing, but he knows 60% of my time is really outside of the IT department. You know, it just happens to be where my team and where I work out of, you know, and we integrate with them, but I work across the whole organization. And I honestly think, you know, the business enabled CISO, the empowered CISO is that you are a business executive that works across the business, whether you're homed in IT or not. Anyhow, Matt, I see you shaking your head, so I know you want to jump in.
Exactly, because, you know, I think one of the things back when we did the CISO desk reference, Bill alluded to, brings with it a certain number of inherent challenges, you know, in terms of being able to judge things vis-a-vis kind of your direct reporting relationship. I think one of the interesting dynamics that we're starting to see, and it'll be fascinating to watch this over time, are CIOs now actually reporting into CISOs, because the CISO, as Gary is alluding to, fundamentally has a more expansive view of the organization. They're looking at regulations, they're looking at issues related to privacy, they're looking at enterprise risk and the security related to a number of different issues related to the same, as well as the company's internal IT stack, as well as third-party services, cloud services, and the like. And so I think one of the things that you see is that CISOs tend to have a more comprehensive, a more holistic view of the organization, if, to Gary's point, they're empowered. They've been given an opportunity to really look at these things systemically and the like. So I think we may see scenarios growing over time where a lot of CISOs will have CIOs reporting into them. The last point I'll add to that, Elliot, just briefly, fundamentally as CISOs, we think about how to break things. You know, we think about where there's risk in ways that perhaps traditional IT don't. How users might be spoofed, how you might tamper with information, how you might repudiate transactions or have information disclosure or deny services or elevate privileges, all the things that one would find with the stride type model. Because we're constantly thinking about where things can go wrong, I think that informs how we look at enterprise risk management.
Yeah, and I think, you know, just to, you know, touch base on that as well, when you really think about it, the CIO's point of view is today. Is email up? Is web up? Is the web portal up? Are we, you know, it's focused on today, where we kind of think of, you know, today, tomorrow, next month, 18 months out, and we're looking across this wider range of stuff, you know, and so it is, I mean, our view is very different.
Yeah.
One final point, Elliot. I noticed one of the questions in the chat box was, let's see, do you see the CISO reporting structure tends to be more effective based on maturity, focus, and business size? Are there times when it makes sense, more or less sense to use A versus B? So one of the things, to Matt's earlier point, that we focused on in the original CISO desk reference guide was this concept of the CISO being really the chief resilience officer and playing a very key role in helping the organization become both cyber resilient, but also resilient to other impacts. And we've seen that really play out a lot with the pandemic that we've all been experiencing over the last couple of years. And one of the points we were making in the CISO desk reference guide was that, how the organization structures itself around the concept of recovering from problems could be a contributing factor to where the CISO actually reports, because the CISO is going to be a huge enabler and partner in that operation. So if that's something that is primarily the focus of the CTO, awesome. Or it could very well be the chief operating officer. It could very well be that that's at the CEO level, where that is fundamentally driven, if that is a large part of the organization's portfolio. So placing the CISO close to that kind of responsibility could also be a key decision point for how the organization best utilizes the skill set, to Matt's earlier point, the very broad skill set that the CISO brings to bear.
Yeah, and Bill, just jumping off from there, when you're talking about that topic there in the CISO executive primer, it's an executive primer. So who are you trying to tell this to? Who is really this book for? And you mentioned the desk reference guide, the original book, and now this is out. So who are you talking to then, and who are you talking to now?
Yeah, so the original 2-volume set, the CISO Desk Reference Guide, Volume 1 and 2, is 18 chapters that really breaks down the CISO role across 18 different domains. And that was very much written towards CISOs, aspiring CISOs, individuals that were in the process of either kind of taking on a much larger or different type of CISO role and really needed a place that they could go to that would help them kind of organize their thoughts around how they viewed the organization and how to kind of set themselves on a path to improvement to kind of get from where they were, which was either at initial assessment, just joining an organization, just coming into this role, to having a mature program. The primer was written for the CISO's peers and the board of directors, so that the CISO could communicate directly to his or her peers, both from the perspective of, this is the role that I have and the challenges that I face, and also, this is what I need from you to be successful in that role. And it also gives the CISO's colleagues an opportunity to understand, if we're going to go out and recruit a CISO, if we're going to elevate a CISO from somebody who has a purely technical role to somebody who's playing more of a executive role, what are the kinds of attributes that we should be looking for? What is the kind of help and support that we need to give that individual? And what should we expect from that individual as we try to mature them into that kind of role? So it was really meant towards that kind of next level of interaction as we're expecting the entire CISO role, kind of industry-wide, to kind of grow up really from an IT specific to a business portfolio kind of role.
Yeah, that's great. It's one. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, please.
I was just going to add, when we look at the primer, what's critical is we've got so many different stakeholders across organizations that may be ill-equipped to deal with security-related topics. And so it would be just like if I were all of a sudden to be the CFO, there's a lot within financial reporting and disclosure that I may not know. Similarly, those stakeholders, when they're trying to learn security, it's a very comprehensive, expansive domain. So the primer is really designed to help those individuals within boards of directors and the C-suite and business unit leaders to understand a little bit more about just how complicated enterprise security can be and what are some of the common threads that can connect those different stakeholders together.
Right. Well, Matt, I think you're up now. I think it's your turn to read here, and I believe that this is a good segue into chapter 3, which I'm sure Dutch Schwartz will probably appreciate this one. Third-party risk. The quote to kick off this chapter is, "Upon the conduct of each depends the fate of all." Alexander the Great. That is epic.
I think when we look at, and I had to make a fairly quick trip, so I don't have the primer right in front of me to read a little excerpt from it. But one thing I will say is when we think about third party and supply chain risk, this is the quintessential challenge of our profession. We can do a relatively good job of controlling things that we actually have control over. Generally speaking, there's good frameworks and standards that we can reference. There's lots of really rich insights on how to protect our networks, how to protect our endpoints, how to protect our users, some of the stuff that your team does. All of those things in the aggregate are relatively straightforward when they're being managed internally. The moment we outsource or transfer certain operational responsibility to a third party, our visibility into that environment tends to diminish quite quickly. And the tools that we have in this space, I think fundamentally are somewhat inadequate. We've got things like SOC 2, type 2 audits that look at both the design and operating effectiveness of controls related to the trust services criteria. But any CISO would tell you there's no way that they could put a lot of assurance on the results of a SOC 2 audit because they all kind of read the same. It's an unqualified opinion. There may be one or two exceptions, but we all know that the operating truth or the ground truth of that service provider is likely very different. Then we go into these SIGs, these standardized information gathering questionnaires, and those too tend to be kind of almost a perfunctory response to these routine questions. And so I think one of the things that we're going to have to work through in our industry and our profession is how do we improve visibility between and among different organizations? And one of the things that I used to do when I ran my own security practice within the data center and managed services environment, if Gary was a customer of mine, I would want to meet with him and have stewardship meetings and outline, Gary, this is what my organization will do from a security perspective. Here's our service demarcation point. Here is where you need to kind of assume from a complementary user entity control where your area comes into play. And one of the things that we talked about a lot in the very first perk is this notion of declare war on ambiguity. When it comes to vendor management and supply chain risk, there's a lot of ambiguity there that needs to be clarified. So I think a good operating model is what is it that I don't know about a prospective vendor that I should know, and how do I find that out, and how do I keep that information current?
Yeah, I know Gary recently wrote a piece that I really enjoyed. And I think that everybody is required reading before you talk to a CISO if you're a vendor, the manifesto. That I think that would be, we'll touch on that. Hopefully we will definitely make time for it. But just save that thought. We'll get back to that because as we're running out of at the time now, I do want to make sure that Gary has a chance to jump off into the human element. And that kicks off with a quote here from, I believe it is Marcus Tullius Cicero. The aim of a ship's captain is a successful voyage, a doctor's health, a general's victory. So the aim of our ideal statesman is the citizen's happy life. That is, a life secure in wealth, rich in resources, abundant in renown, and honorable in its moral character. That is the task which I wish him to accomplish, the greatest and best that any man can have. Marcus Tullius Cicero. Gary, take it from there.
Yeah, we definitely have some good quotes going on here. I feel seriously diminished here. I'm covering obviously the human element. And so I'm going to go ahead and read I got a little short paragraph here. It basically says, in general, everyone should receive security training. The level and depth depends on the job role. The cyber education and awareness program should align with the corporate mission. Cyber hygiene needs to be prioritized, practiced, and taught by every executive, starting with the CEO. Every member of the C-suite must be signed up and evangelizing before you can have an effective cyber awareness training program. Once this foundation is in place, you can start to address awareness, self-defense, and a sense of unity of purpose and shared outcomes. Yep. Honestly, I think one of the hardest parts that most CISOs have is changing the business culture. Is getting the company itself, is honestly protecting the company from itself. And a lot of it is because they've got business practices. They've got, well, this is just the way we've done things around here, and we've been doing it this way for the last decade. And who do you think you are to come here and make these changes? And I don't care what cyber awareness training says. This is the way we've always done things around here. And so you're dealing with these carbon-based life forms that you just want to beat to death with a stapler. And you've got to figure out how do you work with them. And honestly, a lot of it just comes down to you've got to build trust. They've got to understand why you want to make changes, why the context for it, not just internally within the business, but also how a lot of the things that you're teaching them, they can also use at home. They can protect their teenagers and their husband and their wife, and especially when you're working from home. And so I find the human element piece is one of the most challenging, but it's also, I find, the most fun. I love going out and talking with, with my, with the employees here at the company, with the executives that we have here, and and explaining, okay, these are the types of attacks or the types of security issues that we have, and this is why these things are going on. And when we go ahead and we talk about these cyber criminal organizations that are doing these various things, they're all human. And they all have specific reasons and specific goals or specific things that they're doing. And when you really break it down to the human element of it and help people relate to why these things are happening and what you can do to protect yourself at work and at home. And I mean, I honestly think the human element piece is what makes the job as a CISO very fascinating, because you step away from just the technology piece and you have to deal with people. You have to do customer service. You have to, get them to listen to you and work with your teams. And to be effective, you have to be out there. You have to evangelize. They have to know who you are and who your team members are and what's your purpose. What's your vision? What do you want for the company? And why is it good for the company? Why should we follow you? And when you're good at it and they trust you, you can do really cool things. You can get stuff done. And the biggest things I tell CISOs who are in the middle of this is that don't push too hard. Take it piece by piece. It's going to take time. It takes time for them to get used to you and why you're there. Take the fish tacos and beer approach. There's a way I used to do it here in San Diego, is that you find your champions. Find your specific people that want to work with you. Find your core people within the company, within the organization. You partner with them. You help them do well. You help them look good. And they, in turn, evangelize why cybersecurity is important and what you're there for and what your team is there for. And you get each individual victory to where eventually you're able to go ahead and get where you need to be to protect your company. I see you're shaking your head. I see you're shaking your head, Matt, so I'm sure you got something to say about that.
No, just to go, I'm just looking forward to fish tacos and beer. But I love your point, Gary, about connecting the personal and the professional and understanding these risks. I think is so spot on. If you can't really bring it to a personal level, it just never will really resonate. So I could not agree more.
Yeah, and it really is. I mean, it's all about relationships. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. That's okay. I didn't want to break in and break up the conversation. I did want to add one thing to what you were saying, though, about helping people protect themselves and protect their family, their household. Way back in the 80s, when I had created my first help desk, I kind of structured it around the idea of put yourself in the shoes of a emergency room nurse. When someone walks in the emergency room door, they're already having the worst day of their life, and your first goal is to actually make them feel significantly more comfortable and at ease. And the way that I hired my initial help desk employees was I wanted people that sounded like they were smiling on the phone, because when someone's calling the help desk, they're in trouble already. They can't get something working. Maybe they're having a hard time getting their webinar to launch on time or something like that. And they're already nervous, they're already upset, they're already behind their schedule with what they actually have to get accomplished today. So if you can initially make them feel better, make them feel more comfortable, make them feel more secure, then you're going to put them in a place where they can start to think about putting the company first again. Initially, if they're not feeling safe at home, they're not going to be able to take the appropriate safety precautions with the data that we're entrusted to protect. So it's that connection with the individual as a person first that makes such a big difference when it comes to awareness programs.
Well, speaking as someone who knows someone who has had technical difficulties before a webinar before, I believe he told me that standing up and smiling was the appropriate response, and he would appreciate you guys for being such good sports about that. There's been some really great chatter here on the chat here of the webinar, and I wish I could read every single one of these different questions and comments as we go, but we're in the last 5 minutes, and I really do have to turn this back to Gary, because I think a lot of us here, we have a lot of CISOs, we have some vendors, we have some other different professionals and leaders in the information security world. The events are starting to happen again. People are starting to meet up again and mix. Gary, you wrote a piece that really was great. It's required reading for anybody on both sides of the aisle. I think the CISO manifesto, vendor relationship. Oh, why don't you go ahead and introduce that, and maybe tell us about, if you could really tell us what's the one thing that you wish people would remember before they talk to you when they're trying to sell you something or just introduce you to something new?
I mean, I originally wrote this thing beyond more than just hoping to get a couple of beers at RSA. It was more of,
But did you get the beers?
Yeah, I got the beers, definitely. I mean, it was more of, frustration, and yeah, I needed the fish tacos as well. But it was more of, frustration of the people I was talking to who were, they're interrupting my day, they're interrupting my meetings. They're there they got something to sell me, or they're there to go ahead and talk to me, but they really don't understand me. And they don't understand the problems I've got, the issues I'm trying to fix, what I'm trying to do in my company, in my organization, my company. And that's the frustrating part, is that when you really think about it, if you're dealing with CISOs and you're selling to them, if they're looking at buying a technology, the only time they buy technologies is because they're trying to solve a problem. They're trying to manage a risk. They're trying to, fix a control or alleviate an issue with a regulator. It isn't because they just want to go ahead and talk to you and they want some great swag. You need to understand what that problem is, and how it's impacting them. And are you a fit for it? Sometimes you are, sometimes you're not. And I guess that's the biggest thing is, and to understand that problem, you need to know who the CISO is. You need to establish a relationship. You need to know who their peers are. You need to know, what I'm saying? And it drives me crazy when I have people reach out to me and they don't even know who I am or where I'm working at. They're just reading off of, something that they got in Salesforce to go ahead and call, and they're contacting me because, well, you still work at the city of San Diego. And I'm like, no, that was 3 roles ago. Try again. That stuff, it drives me nuts. And it just, for me, it's like, okay, if you're going to get and call this person, you should at least know actively where they're at and what they're doing, and I'm not quiet. I talk about issues that I have, I jump on there and I'm constantly working with people, to go ahead and help them with their issues. And so that's my thing, is that we're going to establish a partnership. We're going to work together. You need to listen. You need to listen. You need to do some investigative work and understand what issues CISOs are facing and what they're trying to go ahead and fix, what they're trying to do. If that CISO is doing NIST, you should know within those 5 domains, where do you fit within those domains for your technology? What problem are you trying to fix? If that CISO is working with and using MITRE, and they're using the attack framework, where do you fit? How do you help them fight the fight? And be able to speak to that. Anyhow, I can go on for quite a while on this.
Next time. We have 3 more minutes. I know you guys are all really busy, so if there is a last question from the audience, I'll take that. Otherwise, I will capitalize on this time to keep on asking questions. In fact, well, I guess we don't have time for another question, but what are some final thoughts you guys want to get across here? We have 1 minute. Who wants to take the last thought on why somebody should be reading the executive primer? Who do you think really needs to read this thing?
I'll jump in on that one. I think boards of directors and members of the executive leadership team really do need to understand this. And I think the quintessential element of the CISO role is to translate digital and kind of technical risk into enterprise risk that those stakeholders can understand. And I think making sure that when a CISO is communicating with the board, communicating with the CEO or the CFO, that he or she is really working to understand the dynamics from that CEO or CFO's perspective and vice versa. What we want to do is kind of tear down those barriers that create confusion, that allow risks not to be identified, not to be treated appropriately. And so I think this book is really designed to kind of start that proverbial dialogue.
Yeah, let me add a little bit onto that. I mean, one of the purposes for putting this book in the hands of the CISO's colleagues and the board of directors is that over the course of the last 20 years, we've been expecting the CISO to make all of the progress of kind of bridging the gap between the highly technical CISO role and the business acumen of the CISO's colleagues and the board. By asking the CISO's colleagues and the board to meet the CISO halfway and learn a bit about what that CISO role is, we can accelerate the objective, which is to get everybody far more cyber secure much more quickly, because the adversaries are not going to stand down. So that's kind of, if you want to know what role you can play to help the CISO, the first thing you can do is pick up this book, understand what our job is, and then meet us halfway in performing that job.
Well said. It's an emerging role. It's an evolving role, as you have lived and know, and it's really kind of fascinating for a person like me to watch something like this. It's, and I've heard people say it's kind of like where the CIO was about 20 years ago. It's just kind of coming into its own. So it's really exciting seeing people like you pioneering this new role and, blazing the trail here. Okay, well, hey, we're at the end of our time. I can't thank you enough. It's really been a pleasure. I really have enjoyed having you on here. You guys are welcome back anytime as a group or individually. I think the audience got a lot out of it. It has been a really lively conversation on the chat line here too. So for those of you who didn't have a chance to participate in the chat, I'll maybe print this off and put it under the blog post of this. So thank you very much. And gentlemen, have a great day. Have a great week. And we'll see you at one of these conferences one of these days. And I promise to be a nice person as a vendor.
It's been a pleasure, Elliot.
Thank you very much.
Everyone be well.
Bye.
Thank you. Good night. Good morning.